This week on Stitches and Stories Studio, we answer a listener question from Heather August about keeping character backstories, future story ideas, and character details organized without losing the magic of discovery writing. We talk about character Bibles, continuity notes, future threads, light foreshadowing, and how to let characters surprise you without letting them steal the steering wheel and drive your manuscript into a ditch. Hello, and welcome back to Stitches and Stories Studio, where we take you from first draft to first reader. I'm Millie, your host, author, indie publisher, and professional wrangler of plot threads, character secrets, and the occasional runaway subplot. This week's episode is a follow up to the last couple of episodes where we've been talking about character development, how to build characters that readers remember, how to give them some depth, and how to move beyond just a name, hair color, and a tragic childhood. Today, we're talking about something very practical because once you start building rich characters, you quickly run into the next problem. How in the world do you keep them all straight? Every writer who builds a cast eventually runs into this. A character starts with one job in the story. They develop a history, a wound, a secret, a relationship, a fear, and a reason why they absolutely will not enter a certain room after dark. Another character appears in chapter 3, says one interesting thing, and suddenly you realize you have enough emotional baggage that it needs its own luggage cart. If you write series fiction, such as fantasy, science fiction, mystery, romance, or anything with more than 3 people and a dog, this becomes a real issue very quickly. Today's episode grows out of the listener question from Heather August, who commented on episode 16, Building Characters Readers Can't Forget. Heather asked how writers keep everyone's backstory and character information straight, separate, and whether we plan a future story ideas ahead of time or let the characters reveal the future as we write. Heather, I love this question because it gets right into the working life of writing. Once your characters become layered, they also become messy. They collect histories, secrets, fears, loyalties, contradictions, and occasionally relatives you didn't know existed until they walked into the chapter with a whole rack of luggage. And then what happens? You need two things at the same time. You need enough story structure to keep the story from turning into a junk drawer and enough flexibility to let the characters surprise you. That balance is especially important for discovery writers like myself, and I am very much a discovery writer. I may know the general direction of a story, I may know the emotional arc, the central conflict, the ending I'm moving towards, or at least the kind of ending the story seems to want. But I don't always know every turn in the road before I begin. Sometimes the character reveals the next piece while I'm writing. Sometimes it's a line of dialogue that lands differently than expected, or a side character leans forward and suddenly becomes important. And sometimes I sit back and look at the screen and think, well, apparently he has a secret now. That's part of the fun, though. It's also where you need a way to keep track of what just happened, because inspiration is wonderful, but it's not always organized. Inspiration will hand you a brilliant character detail at 11:37 at night and then disappear like you never met. Today, we're going to talk about how to keep those characters' information straight and how to manage backstories without overloading the reader, how to handle future story ideas, and how to let characters lead without letting them drive the book into the ditch. So, before we get into today's craft topic, I want to touch on a couple of things happening around the publishing world. The first is Amazon Kindle's Translate, which is in beta for select KDP authors. The service uses AI translation to help authors create translated editions of their books. Amazon says it currently supports English and Spanish translations, as well as German into English, and, and that translated titles will be clearly labeled for the readers. For indie authors, this is worth watching because translations has always been one of those opportunities that sounds wonderful until you see the invoice. Reaching readers in other languages can open up new markets, especially if you write genre fiction with a strong backlist. Romance, fantasy, thrillers, science fiction, mystery, all of those genres have readers around the world. That said, translation is more than just swapping words from one language to another. Tone matters, humor matters, genre expectations matter, and if your book has banter, invented terminology, emotional nuance, or world building, you want to be careful. AI might help lower the barrier, but you'll still want that human reviewer or native language proofreader involved before publishing anything under your name. So, my takeaway is this: Kindle Translate could become a useful tool, especially in the authors with series or a solid backlist, but it's something to approach very thoughtfully. The second update is James Patterson and Bookshop.org, the prize for debut authors. Bookshop.org describes it as a prize for outstanding full length debut books published in the United States with nominations and selections made by independent booksellers. In 2026, Grand Prize winner is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, and the runner up is The Lilac People by Milo Todd. What I like about this is that it points back to something important in publishing. Discovery still matters, and community still matters. We spend a lot of time talking about algorithms, keywords, ads, metadata, newsletters, social media, and all of those things have their place. But booksellers, readers, reviewers, the librarians and podcasters, newsletter swaps, your author friends, and word of mouth are still a big part on how people find your book. For indie authors, that's a good reminder. We don't have to build our writing lives around one platform or just one strategy. We build connections and trust. We build a body of work that actually leads right into today's topic because the same thing is true inside the story itself. Characters become memorable because of their connections, not because we filled out a worksheet and gave them a favorite sandwich. Although, honestly, if the sandwich matters to the plot, write it down. Your future you might forget it. So you want to remind yourself, leave a little breadcrumb. There's always some new debate happening in publishing, especially around technology. But for today's episode, I want to focus on what writers can actually use: tools, process, craft, and how we keep writing better stories. So let's get back to Heather's question. She asked how to keep backstory and character information straight and whether to add force ideas, let the characters tell you the future. My answer is yes, and also carefully. I keep notes, I track details. I try not to rely on memory because memory is a lovely liar. It will tell you with great confidence that your character's scar was on his left hand, and then you will later discover that you wrote right hand in chapter 2. And maybe you even changed it to a shoulder in chapter 7. And by chapter 18, the poor woman apparently has enough scars to qualify as a roadmap. At the same time, I do not want my notes to become a cage. I want room for the character to develop. I want room for the story to breathe and room for that strange electric moment when the character says or does something that feels alive more so than a plan. For me, the real answer is balance. Track what matters, stay open to discovery, and separate confirmed story truth from possible future threads. That last part's important. Not every idea belongs in the same basket. Some details are facts, like the character's name, age, job, family history, physical traits. Some details are continuity. If the character has a scar, a dog, a dead brother, a fear of water, a title, a rank, or a secret character or secret that another character already knows, that belongs in the continuity basket. Some details are possibilities: a future betrayal, sequel hook, possible reveal, a connection you sense but have not yet earned, or a moment that feels like foreshadowing even though you don't fully understand it yet. Those belong in future thread baskets. The separation helps a discovery writer because it keeps everything interesting from becoming a promise. And that's where a lot of us get tangled up. We write one intriguing line and then suddenly we feel obligated to build a whole subplot around it. I mean, the line matters, but maybe it doesn't. There could be texture there, or maybe it's just a seed for book 3. And your brain could be tossing confetti just because you've had too much coffee. The trick is to capture the idea without immediately marrying it. Backstories. One of the first things that helps in separating backstory from story is backstory is what happened before page 1. The story is what happens because of it. Now that sounds simple, but it changes how you handle character information. As writers, we often know more about our characters than the readers need to know right away. We may know about their childhood, family patterns, heartbreaks, former jobs, that embarrassing middle school moment, the exact reason why they refused to eat peaches. And some of that may be useful. Some of that may never appear on the page. And if you're writing the series, it might appear on a page in book 6. So all that's fine. Knowing more than the reader can give the character the depth you're looking for. The danger comes when you try to unload all that information at once. Backstory should create pressure in the present. It should shape behavior, choices, fears, desires, the way the character moves through the current scene. If a character was betrayed, we do not need a 3-page history lesson on that, especially the first time they appear in the book. We need to see how the betrayal lives in them now. Maybe they test people, they avoid commitments, they assume kindness has a price, and they keep escape routes in mind. Or maybe they're funny because joking is safer than admitting fear. So, a backstory fact is information. A backstory wound creates behavior, and behavior is what the readers will remember. Now, readers may not remember every detail of a character's childhood. They will remember that she always sits facing the door, or that he jokes when he's scared, that she never asks for help until she's already bleeding, or that he keeps fixing things because he could not fix that one thing that mattered. When you track backstory, do not only write what happened, write how it shows up. What is the bridge between the past and present? Now, let's talk about letting characters lead. This is one of my favorite parts of writing. Also, one of the reason writers sometimes look slightly haunted when someone asks how the book is going, because the book may be going fine, but the characters have opinions. And as a discovery writer, I often discover the story by writing the story. I may begin with a scene or broad direction. I may know the two characters need to confront each other, or that a clue needs to surface, or the relationship needs a shift. But the exact emotional turn often happens on the page as I'm writing. A character may answer a question more sharply than I expected. Another may stay quiet when I thought they should speak. Someone may lie or reveal tenderness, maybe even mention a place, a name, or a memory that suddenly changes the energy of the scene. When that happens, I pay attention. One of the best questions a writer can ask while drafting is simple: what made the character react that way? A character that flinches at a name, avoids a room, changes the subject, or is too quick to lie, maybe jokes when everyone else is scared. Those reactions are little doorways. Sometimes they reveal the backstory, they reveal the fear, or a future conflict. Then what happens is I try not to force the answer immediately. I make a note, I let the story keep going, and then as the draft develops, I watch to see where that reaction was, and passing the reaction was a passing detail, or is it a thread worth following? That's one of the places where discovery writing feels alive, at least to me. The character does something unexpected. Instead of shutting it down, I listen, ask what that might mean, then decide whether it belongs in story, this scene, a later story, or in a folder where the interesting chaos may simmer for a while. This is balance. Let the character speak, then ask whether the reveal serves the story. Because sometimes the character is leading you towards gold. Sometimes they're leading you into the weeds. And sometimes they're trying to audition for an entirely different book while your current manuscript is standing there holding up clipboard. This happens to me sometimes in my romance. I've got a book right now where I've written it and edited it, and I'm just not happy with the the way the characters are behaving. And I don't want to rewrite the whole thing because I think the premise of the story and the plot is fine. But there's something about the character's behavior is just off, and I need to let that set for a while and go back and visit them sometime in the future. So back to Heather. Heather used the word forestory, and I love that because it captures something slightly different than foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is usually a clue planted for the reader. Forestory, at least the way I think of it, is a future story possibility the writer senses before the story has fully earned it. It may become foreshadowing later on, or it could be a subplot, a sequel thread, or maybe nothing. But at the drafting stage, it can be just a little seed. This is especially true, again, for discovery writers like myself. You don't know whether the detail is important yet. You might write a line about a character refusing to talk about their father, and at the time, it just simply adds texture. Later, you realize the father is central to the character's wound, or that the father doesn't matter, but the refusal to talk does. Or maybe you just cut the line completely. Discovery drafting often creates accidental foreshadowing. You plant something without knowing why. Then later, your subconscious circles back and says, "Remember that little thing? We need that now." And you, the writer, pretend you planned it all along. And this is one of the sacred traditions of storytelling. The practical advice is simple. When something feels like it might matter later, mark it. Don't trust yourself to remember it. Trust me, you won't remember it. You will think you will because it's so important in the moment, because it feels vivid. Then 3 weeks later, after laundry, errands, work, dinner, emails, pets, and one tiny existential crisis on the cereal aisle, that brilliant story thread is completely gone. So mark it. Use a comment in your manuscript, brackets, a note, a future thread section in your character Bible. You can write something as simple as possible future reveal. Mara recognizes the symbol but lies about it. Or Jonah's fear of storms may connect to the shipwreck backstory. Keep an eye on this object. Might be important. You're not making a promise. You're leaving yourself a breadcrumb. And sometimes breadcrumbs can save the book. When keeping character information straight, I like to keep the systems simple. You can use a Word document, Google Doc, a notebook, spreadsheet, plotter, Notion, Scrivener, index cards, sticky notes, or whatever your brain will actually use. The tool is less important than the actual habit. At minimum, I would keep 3 places for character information. First is the character Bible, where you track facts, age, description, roles, relationships, things like that. Then the second is your continuity file, where you track details that are easy to forget, scars, family names, job titles. You don't want to accidentally change something 3 chapters in. And the third is future threads document, which is where I would put the 4 story ideas, possibly foreshadowing, sequel hooks, unresolved questions. There's little character moments that seem important but haven't been fully explained yet. That separation helps because it keeps every note from becoming a commitment. The character Bible is what is true. The continuity file is for what must stay consistent, and the future threads document is for what might become important later. That gives a discovery writer room to explore without losing the pieces that matter the most. And if you're using Word, this can be as simple as 3 documents in the same folder. If you're using Google Docs, you can create the same system in bookmark sections. If you're using Plotter, Notion, or Scrivener, you can create character profiles and link them to scenes, timelines, or books in the series. If you're more visual, index cards work beautifully. 1 card per character, a few essential facts, a secret, future possibility, and enough room to shuffle them around on the table when you need to see the cast relationships. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, start small. Don't build a whole author command center when all you need is a 2 page reference document. The best system is the one that you will open while you're writing. And if some system is simple, and I recommend you keep it that way, starting from scratch or trying to rescue a messy draft, you don't need a complex system. That's just going to overwhelm you even more. So creating the character Bible, the continuity file, and the future thread document ahead of time, you can just have those available to you and jot in notes or fill in things as you go along so that you're not trying to go back and read half a manuscript and fill those in later. In the character Bible, again, you're going to stick to what's true, the facts, core information about the character's relationships, emotional wounds, goals, fears, secrets. And again, continuity is where you want to stay consistent and keep those things like your physical description, family members' names if they have siblings or parents, titles, ranks, injuries, where that scar that we talked about is located. And then future threads might become the most important, particularly if you are a series writer. This is where you place your four story ideas, sequel hooks, possible betrayals, unresolved questions, unexplained reactions, and little sparks that grow into something later. I use that quite a bit in my Echoes of Eden series because there is so much I find that can really lead into one of the other books. So at the end of book one, there's one last signal, but only Ty sees it. Ty's the droid. He's the only one that sees it. So that kind of leaves it open. That's, a little foreshadowing, a little forestory. Is that signal going to show up again? Is Ty going to reveal that he saw it or he shares the information about it? Who knows? So here's how this can look in practice. Let's say you have a character named Elena, and in the character Bible, you write that she's a medic. She grew up in a military family and avoids talking about her older brother. She believes needed help makes her weak. But over in the continuity file, you might write that Elena has a scar on her right hand, does not drink coffee, calls the captain by title, and was present during the accident in chapter 5. In the future threads document, you might write that Elena's brother may have served with the captain and that her silence during the accident scene may become important later. The difference matters. One node is established as truth, the other continuity, the other a possibility. That separation helps you stay organized without pinning the whole story on the wall and gives you a chance to breathe. When a character surprises you, don't panic. Also, don't automatically chase it. Pause long enough to ask whether the surprise deepens the character, creates useful tension, or even belongs in the story at all. It might move the emotional or narrative arc forward. A surprise that deepens the character gives the reader a clearer sense of who the person is. A surprise that creates useful tension puts pressure on the relationship, choices, or stakes. And then a surprise that belongs in the story connects the central conflict or emotional arc. It moves the story forward and gives the scene a little more energy instead of dragging it into a side alley. This doesn't mean that every surprise has to be practical. Some are emotional and thematic. Some change the way that you understand the relationship. Those can be just as important as plot reveals. But if a surprise pulls the book away from its heart, save it for later. Put it in the future threads document, let it simmer. Some ideas need another book to grow into. Writers are idea people. We're dreamers. We can turn one sentence into a trilogy if left unsupervised. A good tracking system lets you honor that idea without surrendering the current manuscript to it. You can say, this belongs now, this belongs later, and this belongs nowhere near this manuscript, but I admire its confidence. Now, that's how you stay open without losing control. One thing I will say clearly is that discovery writing does not mean that the finished book should feel accidental. Drafting is where you discover, revision is where you design. If you discover a major character secret, chapter 18 does not mean you failed because you didn't plant it in chapter 1. It means chapter 18 taught you something, and now you can go back and thread it through earlier chapters. You can add the hesitation, a missing answer, the object on the shelf, the MacGuffin, the line of dialogue that means one thing in the first thread, another later on in the reveal. You can adjust the way the characters react, you can shape the pacing, and reveal feels surprising. It feels earned. And that is one of the reasons revision matters so much. It allows subconscious discoveries of the draft to become an intentional craft on the page. For me, good foreshadowing often comes after the fact. I may not know the exact reveal when I write the first draft, but once I understand it, I can go back and make the story fair. The reader should be able to look back and feel the clues were there, even if they didn't understand them at the time. And that's the sweet spot, surprising yet inevitable. And that's where discovery writing and craft can meet. Here's a simple exercise you can try this week for yourself. Choose one character from your current work in progress, open a blank page, and write a short paragraph answering these questions in your own words. What does this character want right now? What are they afraid will happen? What did they believe about themselves? What happened in their past that shaped that belief? And what might they do in the future that would surprise even them? The last piece is powerful because it invites story. It does not force the plot, it opens a door. Maybe the coward becomes brave, or the loyal friend betrays someone. The villain protects a child, a mentor fails. Maybe the person who always runs finally stays. You don't have to know the answer today. Just write it down, the possibilities. Let the chapter whisper to you. Then decide later when the whisper belongs in that book. After you do that, add some useful pieces to your character Bible, continuity file, or future threads document. This one small habit can save you hours later, especially when your manuscript becomes complicated enough to require snacks and emotional support. So, to answer Heather's question a little more directly, you keep character information straight by creating a system simple enough that you will actually use it. Character Bible, continuity file, future threads document can all give you a place for what is true, what to keep consistent, and what might be important later. And when it comes to forestory, foreshadowing, and letting the character tell you the future, my answer is stay open, pay attention, jot things down. It's okay to let the character lead and the story to evolve. Let your subconscious make strange little offerings. Then sort those offerings out, test them against the story, decide what belongs and what doesn't. Discovery writing is not the absence of craft. Discovery writing is craft in motion. It's listening while you build, following that spark, and then coming back with a lantern and a map. And this is where the best storytelling happens, in my opinion. Not because we controlled every moment from the beginning, but because we paid attention when the story came alive. So that's it for this week's episode of Stitches and Story Studio. Heather, again, thank you for the wonderful question. I love questions like this because they get right into the real working life of writing. They part where the craft, the instinct, the organization, and a little creative chaos all sit down at the same table and try to behave. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. You can find Stitches and Story Studio on Substack, YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. You can find me online at stitchesandstories.com, where I share updates on my books, podcast episodes, writing resources, and whatever story thread I'm chasing next. You can reach me at Millie at stitchesandstories.com. Millie is spelled Milly. And you can find me on social media. On Instagram, I'm Melissa L Story _author. Melissa is spelled Milissa. On Facebook as Melissa L Story. You can follow my sci fi newsletter, The Outer Desk Dispatch, on Substack, where I share behind the scenes updates from my fiction, especially my science fiction, Echoes of Eden. And before we go, I want to mention that Stitches and Stories Studio is open to podcast sponsorship opportunities. If you offer writing related services, including editing, cover design, formatting, branding, marketing, coaching, publishing, all the things, and you think the listeners here would benefit from knowing about that, I'd be happy to talk to you about sponsorship options. Also, I'm open to featuring select new book releases that would be a good fit for this audience, especially from indie authors, small presses, or writers with a clear connection to storytelling, craft, and publishing, or the creative life. Sponsorship opportunities may include host read podcast mentions, newsletter mentions, or combination. For current rates and availability, email me at Millie at stitchesandstories.com and use the subject line podcast sponsorship. As always, thank you for spending part of your week writing with me. Keep writing, keep paying attention to those character whispers. Remember, sometimes the story doesn't hand you the whole map at once. Sometimes it just gives you one thread or one character and asks you to follow along. I'm Millie, and this has been Stitches and Stories Studio, where stories begin. See you next time.